Tell us about your pitch clock article. Just what's happening with the first weekend, what you've seen and what you've heard, and it's super interesting to me.
Eric, to me, it's a huge positive for the sport, and I've heard that from the majority of people I've talked to, especially inside the game, but even some fans too. They seem to enjoy it, and the pace is much better. The times of games are much better. And obviously, you're going to have some dissenters. You always do. It's a free country. People are entitled to their opinions, and there's never unanimity on anything. But I would imagine if you took a poll of baseball fans today, it would be overwhelmingly positive in favor of the clock. Now, my latest article just came out today. It's about something Zach Wheeler said to me during spring training. And he was raising questions about the clock. And he said to me, hey, that Bryce Harper at bat in the NLCS, that doesn't happen under these rules. And he's right. Harper took 50 seconds, 5-0, to get from the on-deck circle to home plate after JT Realmuto's single. Then each pitch in the at-bat was an average of 25 seconds. That's longer than is allowed now with a runner on base, which is 20 seconds. And the drama in that at-bat built. And it built in a very special way, and the dead time probably was part of it. So I kind of raised the question, is that kind of moment going to be lost? And I went back and looked at some other great postseason at-bats from the past. The Mookie Wilson at-bat versus Bob Stanley. A memorable at-bat. It wasn't necessarily what Mookie did. He hit the swiveler to first base that went through Buckner's legs, but just what happened, how the outcome resulted from that particular plate appearance. And then I looked back at Kirk Gibson and Dennis Eckersley, and I spoke to both those guys. And I asked, okay, would that have been different? Could it have been that way under these rules? And obviously the answer is no. And both guys said the same thing, that they like the clock, but at the same time they feel something will be lost. Now then the next question becomes, do you as a sport, does Major League Baseball alter the rules for the late innings of regular season games, for the postseason, or both? Should that happen? My gut is, guys, that it shouldn't happen, that you're just going to have to live with this, and that's the new age of the baseball world we're living in. But it's a fair debate. The commissioner, Rob Manfred, has left his options open. He wants to reserve judgment, see how games play out, which is understandable. But this is a question that's going to come up again. And my basic feeling is, if you change it for the postseason, well, then you're going back to the games that the fans said they didn't want, which is what prompted this whole thing in the first place. The fans said they wanted more action between plays and shorter games. Well, that's what's happening. So to go to the postseason, and then you have, again, 3.5, 4-hour games, well, you're losing that share of the younger audience you might be gaining, who can now see the conclusion of postseason games, which they haven't been able to do before because they're young. And you're not necessarily giving the people what they want. So it's a really delicate subject. It's an interesting subject. And it's going to come up again and again this season.
Two other parts I want to get into is how it is for you, because I know we talked about that before your first official regular season game. And then also just everything else that's being impacted, like stolen bases, batting average. We're seeing way more singles. We're seeing parts of the game that we hadn't seen as much of for a long time. And still, of course, and I'm just going to bring up and generalize, you get plenty of complaining, even in last night's game, like this, on social, this isn't baseball. When there's like one little hiccup, we've had like 4 freaking days. There's one hiccup or there's gamesmanship, right, that's being done, which you're going to have plenty of that. And all of a sudden, this isn't the same game. No, it is the same game. And we're actually getting back to a version of the game that I personally love. And, I'm in my mid-30s, and I loved the game in the 90s and the early 2000s and thought it changed drastically. So the TV thoughts and the rest of the game, what do you think?
The TV part's really interesting. And in my role as a dugout reporter, I was pretty concerned about this because generally when I speak, it's between foul balls, between at-bats, in the dead time. That is now gone. There's still some dead time, of course, the 15 to 20 seconds between pitches and all that, but that's that's a difficult amount of time in which to tell a story, put it that way. So it turns out we talked about this as a broadcast team. I'm sure AJ will have some thoughts when he comes back on his broadcast and how it went. But basically, all I did, Scott, was shorten up. And it's not the same length of story, but there's nothing wrong with self-editing, both when you're writing and both when you're talking on TV. You can often say the same thing in 15, 20 seconds that you're saying in 40. Not always. You can't get all the content out there, but that was just the adjustment that I had to make, and the adjustment Joe Davis and John Smoltz made in different ways in their roles. So I don't know that it compromises the broadcast at all. In fact, I was pretty pleased overall just listening and thinking that it was pretty much the same as it's always been. Now, as for the different rules and things coming into play and the consequences, the positive consequences we're seeing, yes, base hits are up, singles are up, stolen bases way up. And I expect that's going to continue to probably level off at some point. But because of the rules, stolen base attempts are going to keep increasing until teams figure out a way to shut them down. So it's positive for the game. It's more action that we're seeing. And that was the intended result. It's what we're getting. So in my view, it's a more interesting brand of baseball. It's what you said, Scott, going back to the 70s and 80s, the brand we were seeing back then. And that's healthy for the sport. Now, will there be consequences as we go along? Oh, yeah, there are going to be. And I'll give you one. So I talked to Garrett Cole about this. And I mentioned something that we were talking about in the show last week. JT Realmuto, that opening day game when the game sped up on Aaron Nola, and JT basically said, we couldn't slow it down. As a catcher, I could not slow it down. And Garrett Cole said, hey, teams don't make enough use of their mound visits. They haven't gone to the limit in the past. They are not going to the limit now. As a team, we, the Yankees, have discussed if such situations start to get away from us, go to the mound. Use the mound visit. You're allowed 5 in the first 8 innings and then a 6th in the 9th if you use up your allotment. So what's interesting about this is if mound visits increase, it's kind of against what baseball is trying to achieve. It's going to slow the game down again. But right now, it might be the best way for the team on the defensive side of the equation to slow the game down if it speeds up and starts to get out of hand.
Hey, Ken, stolen bases. This is a big topic on the show. You said, I'm making sure you said stolen. Will they even out? You think stolen bases will? Because I think we're going to see a couple guys that exceed 60, 70 stolen bases this year, in my opinion. Has that changed for you since the start of the year? I mean, example, Anthony Volpe got 3 stolen bases in 3 games. I mean, can you see somebody hit the 100 mark? I mean, that's not crazy to say, right?
No, I don't think so, Todd. And what I meant to say was there will come a point, I believe, where teams have pushed it and pushed it and pushed it and have to pull back a little bit. But are the numbers going to increase, both attempts and successes? Absolutely, they're going to increase. And a guy like Ricky Henderson in this game, we'd be looking at 150. I mean,
you know what?
Some crazy number.
That.
Because
appreciate that.
He could, well, he was the best of all time, of course, but a good base stealer, and Volpe appears to be that. His instincts appear to be really good. They're going to be able to take advantage, and the 2 disengagement rule, the larger bases, everything that's in play here, the fact that for years relievers have not even worried about stolen bases and now they have to. Oh yeah, we're going to see this ramp up, but at some point what I was trying to say is that it will get to a point of no return where teams just will have to go backwards a little bit because they're maybe getting thrown out too much. Maybe that doesn't happen, but I anticipate that there is some leveling off at some point.